one of the captures he was most proud of was of Robert Bob Dozier, an outlaw who had evaded the law for many years in the Indian Territories. Bass Reeves tracked Robert Dozier during a rainstorm, shot Dozier's accomplice, giving away his own location. Dozier fired, and Reeves fell. I'll let my friend's words tell the rest of the story. Dozier was just a few yards from the body in the mud when the body raised the gun that had remained in one hand and in a booming voice ordered him to drop his pistol. The outlaw froze, then tried to bring up his own gun, but just as it came level, Bass Reeves fired. The bullet tore through Robert Dozier's neck, and then he was dead. Robert Dozier, this cattle rustler, this horse thief, this murderer, this robber. So he robbed stores, and he robbed, banks, stagecoaches, Indian, lonely riders, anybody that was by themselves, tortured, killed, on and on. And Bass Reeves stopped this motherfucker, stopped him in his tracks. And if you okay, so just listen to what happened, right? So Bass Reeves tracked him down, and he shoots his accomplice. So Robert Dozier's accomplice, his buddy, gets shot, but then that shows Robert Dozier where Bass Reeves is. Robert Dozier then shoots Bass Reeves, or shoots at him, and Bass Reeves falls. Bass Reeves goes down. And so Robert Dozier thinks he killed the great Bass Reeves. And Robert Dozier is laughing about it. But then he turns and looks, and now, look, there's Bass Reeves with a gun pointed right at him. And I got you now. But Robert Dozier's like, oh, I'm not going out like that. So even though the Bass Reeves had the drop on him in that, exchange, Robert Dozier tries to pull the gun up, gets shot in the neck. After tracking the outlaw for several months, Reeves finally had tips that led him to the Cherokee Nation in present-day Oklahoma. On December 20th, 1878, Bass Reeves and only one posseman, so it's 2 on 2, out in the middle of the forest, out in the middle of a rainstorm in Oklahoma somewhere, in the Ozarks, I guess. But Bass Reeves and his buddy, they're getting closer and closer to Robert Dozier. Now, there's an interesting exchange. Before, you had Robert Dozier had sent a message to Bass Reeves somehow. He says, you better stop following me, you better stop tracking me, or I'm going to kill you. So Robert Dozier threatened Bass Reeves, you better stop hunting me or I'm going to kill you. And then Bass Reeves says, well, if you want to kill me, then you have to stop and turn around and face me sometime. He also had said that if you don't have rules, then what do you got? What do you got? You got nothing. So Bass Reeves and his friends is going deeper and deeper into the Cherokee Hills. That night a storm erupted. So there's a storm. It's out in the middle of the woods in Oklahoma. A storm erupted. The two lawmen began looking for a dry place to camp for the night. Bass Reeves, they heard the sound of a gunshot at about the same time as a bullet whizzed by Bass Reeves' head. The two lawmen immediately ran for cover, expecting more gunshots to follow, but heard only silence. Then Bass Reeves saw a shadow moving through the trees and fired twice. The gunfire was quickly returned, at which point the lawmen dove for cover on the ground. Bass Reeves spied his attacker in the trees. It was Dozier, who was laughing loudly, believing he'd gotten his man. Suddenly, Bass Reeves jumped up and ordered Dozier to drop his gun. The outlaw dropped quickly into a crouch, bringing up his rifle. But Bass Reeves was ready with the trigger and shot the outlaw in the neck, killing him instantly. So there you go, December 20th, 1878. This is going to be the highlight, the pinnacle of Bass Reeves. Bass Reeves gets his man. He gets his man, Robert Dozier. He knows he's a wanted man. He's got warrants all over the place. But did Bass Reeves give a shit? Bass Reeves arrested 3,000 people. Bass Reeves would walk out of the courthouse He would work with Judge Isaac Parker. Bass Reeves would walk out of the courthouse, usually with Judge Isaac Parker with a pocket full of warrants. Bass Reeves would carry a pocket full of warrants around with him because he's going to go get his man. 3,000 arrests. Think about how many arrests that is. That's a lot. That's 94 arrests per minute. 3,000 arrests. My God, is there anybody in this world, is there a police officer that's arrested more people than Bass Reeves? He arrested 3,000, killed 14,000, and he was never wounded. He had his hat and his belt shot off, but he was never wounded himself. They said he was around other legendary lawmen of the time in Oklahoma, Heck Thomas and Heck Bruner and Heck Grant Johnson and Bud Ledbetter too, and Bill Tillman. Bill Tillman, Bud Ledbetter, Heck Thomas, Heck Bruner, Grant Johnson. And he would leave Fort Smith with a pocket full of warrants. You know, rally around the family with a pocket full of warrants. So Fort Smith and Red River Valley. So let's talk about Bass Reeves. Okay, let's get down to, so he's going to kill, you know, Robert Dozier. He's a wanted man. He's wanted for murder. So he refused to surrender, but he shot at Bass Reeves. He thought that he did shoot Bass Reeves. So Bass Reeves would have been justified either way. Bass Reeves, you are never, if you're the lawman, you can never be the first one to shoot. You can't shoot first. You can't pull first. And so Bass Reeves shoots Robert Dozier's accomplice, but then Robert Dozier shoots Bass Reeves, or thinks he does, but really Bass Reeves was pretending. Now Bass Reeves, he's done some acting before. So before in the Red River Valley, Bass Reeves, he tricked the mother of two outlaws. So you had two outlaws out on the run. He was going to get a $5,000 reward. So Bass Reeves pretended to be a tramp. He pretended to be a drifter, a poor-ass peasant nobody. Hey, I'm just a poor black peasant nobody. Can you take me in? And I can understand the mother's going to cuss him, you know, out for 3 miles. But he tricks the mother, pretends to be poor, and they get to talking. They said, you know what? We need to all join together. We need to join together. We need some people in our crew, right? So the two sons and the mother and Bass Reeves, they're all going to join their own crew, their own gang. But while the two criminals were sleeping, Bass Reeves arrests them. He puts the handcuffs on them, arrests them, kicks them awake, and then walks them 3 miles to the town that they were wanted at. And while they were walking there, the mother was walking along with them, cussing them out, just saying, you know what, I trusted you. How could you do this to me? Why would you do this? This is ridiculous. And that whole saying, if you don't live by rules, then what do you live by? What do you got? You got nothing. That's Burt Lancaster in the movie Lawman. They talk about him being the Lone Ranger, which isn't the truth, or probably isn't the truth, but Burt Lancaster and the lawman, I think he quotes Bass Reeves when he says, if you don't live by rules, then what do you got? You got nothing. Because that's the same thing that Bass Reeves had told his children when they were sitting there asking him, why does he enforce the white man's laws? Why do you enforce the white man's laws? And Bass Reeves is like, you know, you got to have rules. You got to have rules, and if you don't have rules, then what do you got? You got nothing. So fucking badass, you know, Bass Reeves. Badass Bass. Oh, badass Bass. Oh, Reeves. Oh, badass Bass Reeves. So Bass Reeves, what's Bass Reeves going to do? Bass Reeves is a fucking, he's a badass. Did I mention this? Bass Reeves is going to kill Tom Story. Tom Story of the Tom Story gang, he drew first. So Bass Reeves killed Tom Story in 1889, which is going to be 11 years after he killed Robert Dozier. He burned Ned Christie's place to the ground. He arrested Greenleaf. He got married twice. He had 10 kids. His second wife was Winnie Sumter. Isaac Parker was known as the hanging judge. This was in Oklahoma. This is in Missouri, in Oklahoma during the untamed, uncivilized, the wild times, right? Indian territory. It's where they were sending all the natives. This is in Oklahoma. Literally means the red people. So Bass Reeves, he's going to arrest his own son. He's going to arrest his own son, which shows his integrity, right? So his own son killed his wife, and he arrested him. And then he, served his sentence, and then eventually was able to get out, and then was, a good citizen. The way Bass Reeves, he would go around with 2 Colt pistols, and he would lean the 2 Colt pistols forward with butts leaning forward, so he could, for a quick draw. He had the 2 Colt pistols would lean forward, so it would be a quicker draw that way. So I'd like to tell you more, Bass Reeves' story, that Tom story, that sounds good, that Greenleaf, Ned Christie, there's a couple stories there. And then the son, I don't like some of the stories that they pointed out. Apparently there's one killing that seemed iffy. There's one killing that seemed like, he may have, killed a person, and maybe we can look into that, but he's got an entire lifetime, career, 3,000 arrests, 14, murders. This, Robert Dozier is a shit, piece of shit. So $5,000 reward. It would make you think if, Bass Reeves killed an innocent man, then perhaps it would, put a taint on the rest of his career. Right? If he killed one innocent man, then what about the other ones? Maybe all of them were innocent, or, perhaps they just issued a warrant, and then he goes there with a gun, points a gun in, into their side or whatever, and then they get all crazy. Then he shoots them, and so it's not justified shooting. It was, a cop shooting, right? A killing by the state, an execution, a state execution. So Bass Reeves, Bass Reeves, what a badass. He got his man, Robert Dozier. That was the highlight, the pinnacle of his career. So I'll take a look at these other ones, and actually I'll probably now that I'm talking to, I'll take a look at that other case where he killed the guy with a cook or some shit. And I think he was like an old man, and he was cleaning his gun, and he said it was an accident. It does seem a little... And then, you know what? A guy could fuck up, a guy could kick ass and take names, right? I mean, if Bernie Sanders was to just go off on somebody, does that delete his entire life of great, good, wonderful deeds? I don't think so. So, yeah. Bass Reeves, everybody. Bass Reeves gets his man. Bass Reeves hunted down and killed the criminal Robert Dozier on December 20th, 1878. Peace out, world.